Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legions of Christ, and I'm a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Quest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we are on day 134. We're covering Christus Dominus on bishops, and we're going to cover paragraphs 28 and 29 on the priests of the diocese. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we talked about the various important roles in the diocesan curia, right? The people who work in the diocesan offices. Today, we're going to keep going with chapter 2 here on the bishops in the particular church or diocese. Keep going with section 2.3, assistance in the pastoral office of the diocesan bishops, and start subsection 2.3.3, the diocesan clergy. I know this kind of structure can not be helpful for some, but it is helpful for others. I hope it helps you get that structure so you know where we are. You can kind of make a coherent whole of the documents we're going through instead of just a bunch of punctual things. And that's why I include, and that's also why I include like, hey, what did we cover yesterday? So it reminds you and kind of puts it in that context, hopefully. Today, we're going to cover that the summary of today is priests all sharing the one priesthood and the bond of charity. So we should work together to build the whole diocese up, right? So we're going to cover this section, for the subsection, the diocesan clergy for, I think, 3 days, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so let's go on to paragraph 28. It has 3 subparagraphs, A, B, C. A is talking about all priests sharing in Christ's priesthood, but the bishop determining the different roles priests have in the diocese. B, charity forms the basis for the bishop-priest relationship. And C, priests should care for the whole diocese, right? They're going to have a care for their own things, their own parish and whatever, or school or whatever, but they should care for the whole diocese. So let's start with 28A. All presbyters, both diocesan and religious, participated in exercise with the bishop the one priesthood of Christ, and are thereby constituted prudent cooperators of the episcopal order. In the care of souls, however, the first place is held by the diocesan priests who are incarnated or attached to a particular church, for they have fully dedicated themselves in the service of caring for a single portion of the Lord's flock. In consequence, they form one presbytery and one family whose father is the bishop. In order to distribute more equitably and properly the sacred ministries among the priests, the bishop should possess a necessary freedom in bestowing offices and benefices. Therefore, rights and privileges which may limit this freedom are to be suppressed. Right? So this is what we're getting at, right? So all of us priests share in the one priesthood of Christ, the high priest with Jesus. And then it talks about the distinction here between diocesan and religious priests. Like, obviously, I mentioned at the beginning of every episode, I'm a priest of the Legions of Christ. I'm a religious priest, right? I'm not a diocesan priest. I live currently in the Diocese of San Jose. I am going to move to a different diocese come the fall. And, so that is, those type of things are important. And so these diocesan priests are dedicated to the specific diocese, right? If you're ordained for, like the Diocese of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, you're going to be, or St. Paul, Minneapolis, I forget how they name that diocese, but you're going to be in that area your whole life. And your care is mainly for the people of that diocese, the pastoral care of that diocese, right? And they're more key, right? That's their mission. That's what their mission is, they're ordained for, right? As religious priests, we're ordained for a specific type of mission in our community or a specific mode of doing mission, or, sometimes to a specific location if you're in a monastery, things like that, right? And I've lived and done ministry in many different dioceses in my priesthood, right? And then also, it can get more complicated when you have, say a community that's starting out, that's small, that's just in that diocese. And so they are similar. They are technically diocesan priests, even though they're starting up a community or something like that. Exact distinctions there can get complicated. It also is a little bit different in the sense of, like, if you have a monastery, that monastery, the primary goal is holiness and praying for everybody. It's not necessarily the pastoral care. Although a lot of times the monks of a monastery will have a certain element of pastoral care, right? The priests there might take care of the parish next door. They might have a college or high school attached to the monastery they teach at, things like that, right? And then finally, the bishop is always free to bestow offices and benefices. At times, this was restricted in certain ways in certain parts of the world. This was, in Europe, it was more where like the noble part of town would reject like the pastor who came from like, the peasant stock or something like that. And they might have some right at their parish to do that. In the U.S., a lot of times what the issue was like, there would be like a bunch of Catholics who came from some part of the world and they'd bring their own priests, and that the bishop would say, no, if you're Catholic and I'm the bishop here, I'm assigning this priest to them, and they'd want their own priest. And there were a few places where that got into division. But here it's saying, hey, wait a second, there are no restrictions. The bishop could assign the priests to the parishes as pastors, and there shouldn't be any kind of like veto that a parish has or anything like that. So moving on to B, and the charity forming the basis between priests and bishops. The relationship between the bishop and the diocesan priests should rest most especially upon the bonds of supernatural charity, so that the harmony of the will of the priests with their bishop will render their pastoral activity more faithful, more fruitful. Wherefore, for the sake of greater service of souls, let the bishop call the priest into dialogue, especially about pastoral matters. This he should do not only on a given occasion, but at regularly fixed intervals, insofar as this is possible. Right, so this is important. There's two kind of points here. First of all, that we need that charity as the basis for priestly relationships, right? Not jealousy, not suspicion, not careerism. Hey, I want to become get this position or whatever else. And then also not politics. Too often it's like there's, church politics. It's not a good thing. And we shouldn't be doing it for how we're maneuvering and things, right? In my community, our fourth vow is to not get into that, not seek that. So I'm very much not desiring that at all. But anyways, and then the second part is about the bishop regularly talking about pastoral things with his priests, and talks about dialogue. This, I think a lot of times it's both individually and, more collectively, and kind of a commission, pastoral commission. We talked about, I think yesterday, things like that, right? So those kind of things can be there, right? I know a lot of priests, especially in small to medium dioceses, are able to, at least have an hour talk with each priest every year or two. And that's very helpful so that the bishop really knows the priest. He has a lot of time to talk with them, go over pastoral matters, go over his own spiritual life as much as the priest wants to share with the bishop, right? Because he has the right to privacy in certain aspects of that. But anyways, let's move on to 28C. Priests should care for the whole diocese, right? Obviously, they're going to care most of all for their parish or school, but they should have a certain concern for the entirety of the diocese. Let's read it. Furthermore, all diocesan priests should be united among themselves, and so should share genuine concern for the spiritual welfare of the whole diocese. They should also be mindful that the benefits they receive by reason of their ecclesiastical office are closely bound up with their sacred work. Therefore, they should contribute generously as a bishop may direct and as their means permit to the material needs of the diocese. Right, so they need that concern for the whole diocese, even if they're going to be focused on their parish or school, whatever else, most of the time, right? This is also the idea that we shouldn't be being competitive in the sense of hey, let's poach students from other Catholic schools, or let's hope that this Catholic school fails, and things like that. We should seek the good of all, right? Obviously, if a parish school, the pastor wants that school to succeed most of the time, right? I've never met a pastor who's oh, wow, I'm so excited I get to close down the school, right? No. I mean, sometimes the pastor has to do that because the numbers just don't work out, but I've never seen a pastor excited about that, right? But they are excited, and so they all want to build up the schools. They want things to succeed, but we shouldn't do it in a way that, that kind of the other side has to lose in the church, right? And then finally, it notes that our benefits as priests, like salaries or stipends, come from our sacred work, right? So the priests get a salary from the diocese, or as religious, we often get it as a stipend rather than as a salary, but we get paid for our work, right? So when I teach at the seminary, I get paid by the seminary to teach there, right? And things like that. I get paid, but really my religious community gets paid. It goes straight to my religious community as a religious. Anyways, so let's move on to paragraph 29. It has two subparagraphs, but I'm going to read them together. It's talking about priests in various pastoral roles and how they're important to the diocese and the bishop. This is not going to talk about parishes, pastors, associate pastors. That's going to be what we cover the next 2 days. So it's kind of priests, diocesan priests in other roles. So let's read it. 29a. The closer collaborators of the bishop are those priests who are charged with a pastoral office or apostolic organization of a supra-parochial nature, whether they're in a certain area of the diocese or among special groups of the faithful or with respect to a special kind of activity. B. Priests assigned by the bishop to various works of the apostolate, whether in schools or in other institutions or associations, contribute an exceedingly valuable assistance. Those priests also who are engaged in supra-diocesan works are commended to the special attention of the bishop in whose diocese they reside, for they perform outstanding works of the apostolate. Right, so that's that. So we have this We have these terms here, supra-parochial and supra-diocesan. So supra just means above. So the idea here would be like the one in the diocese, the one who's close collaborator with the bishop, he's organizing, say he's like the one organizing Catholic schools, or things like that. Like I know one of the priests of my, in the Legions of Christ, he's responsible for Catholic identity at Catholic schools. So he's kind of like that supra-diocesan thing, right? And so he goes to make sure all the Catholic schools are being super Catholic, right? And then supra-diocesan would be the same thing, but more national or regional, organizations like the USCCB or somebody who's like working for some kind of ministry across various dioceses, things like that. So there are those three areas, right? Overseeing some apostolate across the diocese, some specific apostolate outside of parish, like a school or retreat center or other kind of ministry like that. I mean, even the seminary to a large extent fits that. And then some overarching coordination among various dioceses, among some kind of ministry in various dioceses, right? All is important. The bishops care for these priests. And, it notes that specific close collaboration of those who are kind of like overseeing some area of apostolate in the diocese or some specific type of apostolate in the diocese kind of above, parishes, supra-parochial. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarQuest produce it, another great podcast, at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we are going to continue with the next paragraphs of Christus Dominus, or the next paragraph, which is 30, on the role of pastors and parishes. And then the day after that is like associate pastors and things like that. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. There's also an SQPN Discord server with a channel for Vatican II in the Year at sqpn.com/Discord, and I go there pretty regularly if you want to use that as a means of feedback.
Amen.